more occulted history and truth suppressed by the Anglo-American Empire.
There is another group out there which is just as dangerous, just as secret, just as cunning as the Rhodesians. And they, by the way, took a clue from the Rhodesians and they got rid of their name a few years ago. We used to call them communists. And then they got rid of their name. They pretended to go away. They pretended that they crumbled overnight. Great miracle. They're still there. I call them the Leninists. They have never renounced the theories or the goals of Lenin. They just renounced communism. Well, they never really had communism in any of those countries anyway. They always referred to themselves as socialists or Leninists or what have you. But all the old former communist commissars simply took their hat off and said communist on the front of it. They turned it around and now it said social democrat. But you notice it's the same heads underneath the hats. The heads didn't change, nor did their real policies. But I want to emphasize that there is another very large and powerful and dangerous group out there, which I call the Leninists. And the Leninists and the Rhodesians are often seen warring against each other. Just take a look at Mr. Bush in Washington, D.C., and in Venezuela we've got Chavez. Now there's a perfect example of the Rhodesians versus the Leninists. And they fight each other. They are opposed to each other. They criticize each other. They hate each other. But the world that they want is the same. The only thing they disagree with is not ideology. It's who is going to run this new world order. Is it going to be the so-called left or will it be the so-called right? And when you peel off all of those labels and you look underneath, you'll find that in all of these camps, what they really stand for is collectivism. That's the word we should be using. They're all collectivist in nature. But then they wrap themselves in flags and different rhetoric and they appear to oppose each other. But I want to emphasize, just because we are focusing tonight on one group does not mean that that is the only place we need to keep our guard up. Because we have another equally potential group very much alive in the world today. Now, that is my summary. It's time now to let the conspirators describe it, and so I'm going to do some reading for you. The conspirators themselves really have said basically what I have said. Now, we'll begin, where am I? Okay. We'll begin in Tragedy and Hope by Carroll Quigley, and he says this. He says, I know of the operation of this network. There he calls it a network. Because I have studied it for 20 years and was permitted for 2 years during the 1960s to examine its papers and secret records. I have no aversion to it or to most of its aims and have for much of my life been close to it and to many of the instruments. In general, my chief difference of opinion is that it wishes to remain unknown. Now, in the Anglo-American establishment, Quigley says this. The Rhodes Scholarship established by the terms of Cecil Rhodes' seventh will are known to everyone. What is not so widely known is that Rhodes, in 5 previous wills, left his fortune to form a secret society which was to devote itself to the preservation and expansion of the British Empire. And what does not seem to be known to anyone is that this secret society continues to exist to this day. To be sure, it is not a childish thing like the Ku Klux Klan, and it does not have any secret robes, secret handclasps, or secret passwords. It does not need any of these, since its members know each other intimately. It probably has no oaths of secrecy, nor any formal procedure of initiation. It does, however, exist and hold secret meetings. This group, as I shall show, is one of the most important historical facts of the 20th century. Now, one of the original leaders of this group, one of the organizers, was a fellow by the name of William Stead. Now, William Stead was so important that he was the executor of Cecil Rhodes' will. So he should know what he's talking about. And he wrote a book entitled The Last Will and Testament of C.J. Rhodes. And in that book, William Stead said this: Mr. Rhodes was more than the founder of a dynasty. He aspired to be the creator of one of those vast, semi-religious, quasi-political associations which, like the Society of Jesus, have played so large a part in the history of the world. To be more strictly accurate, he wished to found an order as the instrument of the will of the dynasty. So you see, they're looking at this like an order. It's not just a group or an organization, it's an order, like the Knights Templar or something like that. It's a chivalric order. In Cecil Rhodes' handwritten manuscript, this was not published until fairly recently, we find this coming directly from Cecil Rhodes' own pen. He said, I contend that we English are the finest race in the world, and that... I don't know what to do about this. Stop breathing, I guess. He says, I contend that we English are the finest race in the world, and that the more of the world we inhabit, the better it is for the human race. What scheme could we think of to forward this object? I look into history, and I read the story of the Jesuits. I see what they were able to do in a bad cause, and I might say, under bad leaders. In the present day, I became a member of the Masonic order. I see the wealth and power they possess, the influence they hold, and I think over their ceremonies, and I wonder that a large body of men can devote themselves to what at times appear to be the most ridiculous and absurd rites without an object and without an end. The idea, gleaming and dancing before one's eyes, like a will-o'-the-wisp, at last frames itself into a plan. Why should we not form a secret society, but with one object, the furtherance of the British Empire and the bringing of the whole uncivilized world under British rule? So there you have it from the mind of the founder. Back to Quigley. In his own words, he says that the goal of the secret society was, quote, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. The system was to be controlled in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world, acting in concert by secret agreements arrived at in frequent private meetings and conferences. Now, you see the trilateral meetings and the Bilderberg meetings begin to take on more significance when you realize that that's really part of this plan. On page 4 of the Anglo-American Establishment, Quigley says this: this organization has been able to conceal its existence quite successfully, and many of its most influential members, satisfied to possess the reality rather than the appearance of power, are unknown even to close students of British history, partly because of the deliberate policy of secrecy which this group has adopted. You see, there he calls it a group, which this group has adopted, partly because the group itself is not closely integrated, but rather appears as a series of overlapping circles or rings, partly concealed by being hidden behind formally organized groups of no obvious political significance. End quote. And then regarding the conspiratorial structure of this group, Quigley tells us this, quote, in the secret society, Rhodes was to be leader. Stead, Brett, Lord Esher, and Milner were to form an executive committee called the Society of the Elect. Arthur, Lord Balfour, Sir Harry Johnston, Lord Rothschild, Albert Lord Grey, and others were listed as potential members of a circle of initiates, while there was to be an outer circle known as the Association of Helpers. Those phrases, ladies and gentlemen, that I just read are lifted from Adam Weishaupt. Those are his phrases. Association of Helpers. This was later organized by Milner as the Round Table organizations that I mentioned a moment ago. After the death of Cecil Rhodes, the organization fell under the control of Lord Alfred Milner, who recruited young men from the upper class of society to become part of the Association of Helpers, which, as I mentioned, became later known as the Round Tables. Now, this group of young men, recruited from the higher levels of British society, were unofficially called at that time Milner's Kindergarten. Of course, they were young men. They were coming up in politics and in banking, and they came from the finest families. But they called them Milner's Kindergarten because they worked very closely together, and they tutored them and helped them get into positions of authority, especially in government. Now, they were placed into the power centers of society, and eventually they became the round table organizations in each of those countries. And so they were the inner circle of a larger circle around them. Now, while reviewing all of this, it's important for us to keep in mind that the primary purpose of a secret society is to keep secrets. It's pretty obvious. But that means that one of their major objectives is deceit. You have to be deceitful if you're going to keep secrets, even if you simply say, I don't know, which Hillary Clinton, I was just informed, who probably attended the last Bilderberg meeting, but when they asked her on camera, did she attend the Bilderberg meeting, she said, I don't know anything about that. And I guess the reporter said, well, your husband attended the last one. And she said, oh, he did? I don't know anything about it. See? Well, anyway, that's what you'd expect. If you have an affiliation with a secret society, you better be prepared for a little bit of deceit or you're not a good member. Now, to the gullible public, these people deny their plans and their goals, obviously, because the public, for the large part, would not necessarily understand them in an approving way. So, they lie a lot, but when they speak to themselves in their own private papers and before conclaves which are expected to remain confidential, they often tell the whole unvarnished truth. And every once in a while, if you're researching all of their papers, you'll find a little gem, which I'm going to, like the one I'm going to read to you now. This one was written by one of Milner's Kindergarten. His name, you'll recognize, Arnold Toynbee. He's a renowned historian. He was a professor at the London School of Economics. He was a director of studies at the Royal Institute of International Affairs, which was a front for the Round Table. He was a British intelligence agent and the author of that very famous 12-volume History of the World. It's called A Study of History, which extols the virtue of world government and collectivism. So he's a big guy. In November of 1931, in that issue of International Affairs, which was published as an insider publication just for members of that round table, this is what Toynbee said, and this is a gem. He said, I will hereby repeat that we are at present working discreetly, but with all our might, to wrest this mysterious political force called sovereignty out of the clutches of the local national states of the world. And all the time we are denying with our lips what we are doing with our hands, end quote. And that, of course, just makes sense. People want to go to the members of the Council on Foreign Relations and say, are you guys really planning world government and loss of sovereignty and so forth? Of course not, they say. Are you really planning to merge America, the United States with Canada and Mexico? Absurd. See, this is just part of the game, and you must understand it.